Rural folks, what are the things city folks won't understand? Which city dwellers will not understand, but in the village, it's the norm? Write in the comments what you think. Enjoy the show. Story 1. How disconnected you are with no reliable cell service, no over-the-air TV, and political talk radio is a thing. Life is ran at a much slower pace. People are tougher out here. We learn the importance of being self-reliant. Guns are a tool for hunting for food, not showing how badass you are. People seem to be more cautious of outsiders and tend to stick to themselves. The local restaurant, always a great place to catch up on the local viewpoints about the politics and opinions of the government or new events. Coffee runs through the body instead of blood. We personally did not have AC, internet, or satellite TV before 1997. Story 2. I've lived in all three: rural, suburbia, and a small city. In rural areas, you coexist with nature. City folk don't get that because they're used to having had nature submit to their bustling metropolis. But out in the country, we coexist with nature. Wildlife lives around us. Mountain lions, cougars, coyotes, and so on are a thing. So are deer. Stray cats and dogs are a thing too. Weather can destroy an entire season for you if you farm stuff. Hail, storms, blizzards, any sort of extreme weather will end your efforts. Once, in a rural village I lived in, I saw a humongous porcupine as big as the car on the road passing across. It was huge. Nobody believed me. Everybody, except my dad who saw it too, insisted I must have been seeing things in the dark. But I think the one thing many city folk don't understand and never will is, we like it this way. It's nice, quiet. The loudest noise is some stray animal. The kids feel safe. Very low chance of anything bad happening, and everyone knows everyone. We know the officer, we know the post office guy, we know the grocery store clerk, and we know their children. In a city, the only people you know well are those who live above or below you, if even. Most of the time, whoever you met yesterday, you'll never see again. In the village, you will see them again. They grew up with you. Story 3. How necessary guns are to our way of life, and how much we distrust government. Our communities are rather insular, and we mostly want to be left alone, so we hate anything we perceive as an attempt to control or extort us, i.e., gun regulations, new taxes, new laws. I've lived both in larger cities and far out into the countryside, and it's amazing how much my opinions have changed based on where I live. In the city, you rely on authority figures, institutions to solve your problems, and you might be more willing to deal with some restrictions or regulations as the trade-off for that convenience. In the countryside, you can only rely on yourself/neighbors/people near you to help. It often feels like the government in the faraway city mostly takes your money without offering much in exchange. Think about it. All of the emergency services are 30 minutes away, and the only time you regularly interact with the government is to pay taxes. I think a large part of our political divide comes down to people in cities writing laws that apply to rural areas, without caring how those laws affect them. I hope this gives some perspective. Story 4. I'm surprised by how many of those things mentioned here I have known since very early childhood, despite living in a 100K plus resident city, as well as all my friends from the same city. The only one among us who is completely lost when it comes to such stuff comes from a small town suburbs, and he used to live about 50 meters from a cornfield. Wonder, is it a coincidence, or do we Poles have different culture than Americans? Like, if you're from the city, you'll 100% spend every single holiday on the countryside and learn their ways. Also, our city has some agricultural areas in its suburbs. Story 5. Hands up, I'm city folk, but I come from farming and have spent whole seasons helping my family on their farm. I can jump between both environments with ease. People in the city, you don't understand how animals become food. You might know what physically happens in the abattoir, but it's a theory to you, and I can guarantee that all of you who go, yeah, I'd be able to hunt down my own meat in an apocalypse situation, most of you won't be able to go through with it until you are truly desperate. Story 6. That I don't want or need entertainment thrown at me 24/7. That I don't want people up in my face all the time. That quiet can be as awesome and beautiful as any play, concert, or movie. That nature is more beautiful than any store or street or building or art. That there is more life and joy in my stand of trees than in their entire apartment building. That the whisper of wind through an open window can be more beautiful than a lover's sigh. Story 7. Issues like gang wars, police brutality, racism are as far away from us as the war in Ukraine. They're unfortunate and we wish it wasn't happening, but it really has nothing to do with us, and has no bearing on our lives. Because of media propaganda, people seem to think rural Americans are racist. I've met quite a few Black or Latinos in my small town who were shocked at how friendly everyone is, and I guess that they aren't being lynched or something. We talk to the same people every day, our whole lives. It's awesome to see a new face. We don't give a shit what color you are. There's 9 cops in my hometown. They have no desire to get in a shootout ever. They would be heavily outgunned and outnumbered and know it. That means they're very polite when dealing with the public and always de-escalate when things start getting heated. You can walk anywhere in town with any kind of gun. The cops just smile and wave and go on about their business. Story 8. I've lived in the suburbs in IN, Illinois, and, but it wasn't until I moved to the suburbs in the South that it felt different. We have the phone number on a post-it if the neighbor's cows are on the road. It's normal to hear gunshots in the woods behind our house while the kids are swimming in the backyard. I'm all too familiar with the sound of the tornado siren. Unfortunately, became familiar with tarantulas and scorpions. There's no gas station in our city and no grocery store, but Brahms has a little store inside it for essentials. It's absolutely silent at night, even though I live in a subdivision surrounded by neighbors. Well, except for coyotes. Story 9, City Boy, and I'm loving what I'm reading. I got invited to a party on a farm a while back that was like 6-7 hours out the city, and I learned 4 things. Y'all country folk know how to party. Don't fall off the roof of the stable into the horse pen. Enclosure? My ribs didn't feel right for like 2 months. Horses are massive, and I'm lucky to be alive after stumbling into one in the pitch black. I'm lucky to be alive after stumbling into a horse in the pitch black. Story 10. There is a good chance if you drink boxed wine and don't have bear-proof trash cans at some point, a drunk black bear will pass out on your porch, and while fighting with your wife and drinking tequila, you will get in an argument about not taking out the trash, so you will do it. Trip, fall into something warm, and say fuck it and fall asleep. To sober up and find yourself being poked by a broom from your wife, and realize you are asleep on said drunk bear. 3 hours later, said bear will wobble off, probably less hungover. A few weeks later, during another fight, you will pour wine in a dog bowl when you see the bear lumbering up the steps, and they will be a pretty cool drinking buddy. Now the damn alligator that blocked the driveway, he is always an ass. Story 11. Being different means you're the bullied kid. And I don't mean you get made fun of. I mean you get your ass beat, depending on your case. I grew up in a religiously indifferent household. No church days, no supper prayer. Just believe what you want as long as you behave and don't start fights over it with the family. Post-elementary, word got out after I refused to pray when some kid I never met died in an accident. It wasn't long before every kid in school knew I didn't keep the faith. Fights were a weekly event all the way through high school. I got off pretty easy too. They went after the gay kids way harder than they did me. I learned to keep things that I could use on hand. Salt in my pocket, if not something solid to swing with. Which leads to, a rural fight isn't always like you see online. The number of times it was just me and someone else punching each other was only a little more than double the number of times I got jumped and had to resort to some sort of weapon. Story 12. How utterly quiet and still it seems at night here, except for the cicadas, frogs, crickets, and the cries of sparrows as they wheel through the night hunting insects. Maybe a faraway train whistle in the distance. It's so peaceful and perfect without hearing a single car for many hours sometimes. Sleep comes easy and deeply, and after a week, your accumulated fulfilling sleep really starts making a significant improvement to your life on every level. You have more energy, feel more rested and relaxed. It just gets better and better the longer time you spend your nights rurally. At least for me. Story 13. Farms do stink. Farm animals stink too. Fields stink too. And it's completely normal to wake up early in the morning with a rooster or birds singing. 90% of the tourists who came here to relax don't know that. And then once they see it, start complaining about the smell, the sounds, the bugs. Go back to your contaminated city center, please, and let us live peacefully. You all need to be grateful. Thanks to that smell, sounds, or bugs, you have food on stores and can eat every day. BTW, we are not stupid. A lot of country people do have degrees. We also have schools, hospitals, and courts. If a war started today, country people will be much hard to beat than city people. We do know how to survive. Also, please don't come here to speculate with houses, bussiness, or hotels. We don't want you here. All those houses, farms, and fields belong to our village citizens. They are not made for rich city people who only came here to fuck our economy and salaries. Sorry. Story 14. In many parts of Australia, you still pay taxes, with some discounts, but all the infrastructure and services that people have in the city, even emergency services, are just not there. It's all on you. You have water tanks, a water truck, fuel tanks, a fuel truck, a mechanic shop and workshop, big chest freezers, sometimes even an airstrip. Obviously no public transport, etc., etc., etc. That said, it's a good life, and some of my relatives will literally drive an extra 100 kilometers just to avoid big towns, which they refer to as the city. Only real problem is now that they're older, they need to visit doctors and hospitals more often, and that means they need to travel to the city, which they hate. They all want to die on their farms. Story 15. Just because you went and paid for a movie ticket doesn't mean the theater will show it. I went to see Transformers 3, but there was only 3 of us in the theater. They told us it would not cover the cost of playing the movie, so they gave us our money back and told us to go. Having wild cougars spotted in town so children couldn't play outside for like a whole year. Really awked during recess and lunchtime. I really wanted to play on the playground. Story 16. So many things. To preface, I grew up on a cattle ranch in one of the smallest counties in the US. I've since moved away. But here are some of the things I wish people knew rural folks experienced. Driving an hour or longer to the nearest doctor, pharmacy, grocery store, etc. Seeing every single star in the night sky. Maybe a specific one for farm and ranch kids. But aiding in the births of so many animals and getting no sleep during calving season, fighting fires with tanks and hoses attached to four-wheelers or flatbed trucks, bonus points if you wear flip-flops, everyone knowing everything about you and not being afraid to let you know, no running water when the power's out, no cell service. If you get locked out away from the Wi-Fi or need something out in the field, you're screwed. Learning to drive as a literal child, I was like 8. Delicious well water. Being on high alert when you see an unfamiliar car drive up your road, you only ever see the same few cars of your family, friends, or the male person. Witnessing your pets and livestock die in terrible ways that scar you for life. Peak social interaction is going to the small bar 30 minutes away in a town of 145 people. Your graduating class being 8 people. There's definitely more, but these are the ones I could think of off of the top of my head. Story 17, UK-based. I moved to the arse end of Cornwall, proper rural. Picked up the local paper, full front page of was about a strimmer stolen from a shed. That's a weed whacker for our American brethren. Had a proper compa face with an open shed and everything. Had me chuckling for days. Real crime like murders, etc. are extraordinarily rare. My rural hometown had one murder 25 years ago and people still talk about it like it happened last week. Story 18. My parents grew up in NYC. My grandma was in the city all my life. And I grew up in a large-sized suburbs. But during my teen years, I went to a camp out in the boonies of Colorado. I remember sitting on the lawn of the camp as we all played some game or other when we heard the sound of sirens. I literally didn't even blink or notice them, but about 15 of my campmates all went running to check it out. Apparently some car fell into an embankment or something. And yes, several of the people who went running knew the people in the accident. As someone who grew up hearing sirens constantly, I was absolutely startled by their reaction. Story 19. How much I rely on delivery services. There is a lot of stuff I just can't find even though I live just 20 minutes from the largest town in Northern California. 10 brands of white bread can be had. But Italian green beans or anything ethnic have to be bought by the box and shipped. Cheap crap is in abundance. But good stuff that lasts comes with a shipping charge. I know my UPS and mail person well. Story 20. Barter economies. Generally, the people who live rural areas tend to be more self-sufficient, with diversified skill sets. There are a few reasons. Land is cheaper, so growing, raising more of your own food is feasible. Proximity to stores is less convenient. Incomes are lower and families are larger, so more incentive to be efficient. Cultural values also just tend to favor self-reliance. Since they have less money and more self-made goods services, barter networks tend to emerge, reinforcing community ties. A few examples of things my family traded or traded for. Homemade maple syrup, eggs, meat, milk, hay, feed quality and bedding straw, a dozen types of garden fruits and vegetables, fresh, canned, or pickled, mechanic services, handed down clothes, baked goods, knitted garments, taking care of someone's animals/garden while they're away, watching someone's child or elderly grandmother rides to work, etc. I took a home economics class in high school, and one of the textbook lessons involved a budget of the minimum amount of money a family needed to survive. 16-year-old me looked around the room incredulously and thought, 2/3 of the families here make less than this minimum. How are they spending so much? Of course, the mismatch was because the writers assumed that every need would be met with the expenditure of money, which is something urban people don't understand about rural people. Story 21. When I was young, I used to camp in a wilderness area in northern New York not far from our family camp. Mind you, this is the sort of place where you have to stop and tell the ranger how far back you are going and when you are planning to come out. So I suggested it to my boyfriend for a weekend getaway. We get there, pitch the tent, make a fire, dinner, went to sleep. He wakes me up like 2 hours later because something hit the side of the tent. I could tell it was a bear because of the sounds it was making. I told him it was just nosing around looking for food. I told him to just ignore it and go back to sleep. I did. He was so petrified he sat up all night with a knife in his hand. Story 22. That there is real and extreme poverty out in the country, but because people don't live bunched up in social neighborhoods and probably can't portray themselves as a discriminated minority, nobody sees them, hears them, or cares for them. I remember one occasion I went to a mate's house to fetch some documents he had. I was in the military, and I passed his house number thinking I must have lost myself. Nobody would live in that wreck of a house. The bottom of the doors was rotten, and there were broken glass panes mended with cardboard and tape. Story 23. If you do safety measures that are normal in the city, like lock your car or bike, put your belongings in the trunk, lock your front door from the inside, your neighbors will be extremely offended or think you're very weird. No one but them and their families has set foot on this road in 10 years. If you act like this, it's like telling them to their face that you think they're robbers and dishonest people. My friend from the city didn't want to leave the car alone to pay at a gas station. I nearly died of shame and still apologize to the clerk every time I pass by. Story 24. Not exactly rural by USA standards, but I come from rural coastal UK, and the sheer number of fuckwits I have had to rescue from beaches and sea cliffs over the years because they have no concept of what tides are, or the number of times the Coast Guard has been called out for people swimming at the beach with no idea there is a riptide or outgoing tide, and they end up well on their way to the Atlantic Ocean. Story 25. The same exact problems exist in rural areas as in cities. The only difference is that we don't talk about it. There's going to be an alcoholic wife-beater in your community. There will be 3 different people addicted to pills or meth. There will be people struggling with all kinds of stuff. Everyone knows about it, but it's basically forbidden conversation to even suggest that anyone try to get help. There are no resources or services for anyone. Instead, the resource is Jane and Dave go over to the local alcoholic loner's house once a week to make sure he isn't dead. If there's a domestic dispute, the police take an hour or more to show up, if they even show up at all. Despite all the benefits of living in a rural area, there are still major problems that cut deep and hard through communities. Story 26. Gunshots are a normal occurrence, rarely nefarious. But when I moved from the backwoods to the city, I would tell city folk about that and they'd look at me like I was a gang member. I can tell the difference between fireworks and gunfire on July 4th here, and people think I'm crazy. I took a friend to my hometown once and he legitimately asked, "Why TF would anyone want to live here? There's wild animals and pickup trucks everywhere." Story 27. When you live out with a rural fire department, they are only there for damage control, not to save property because whatever caught on fire is gone up in flames before they can get to it. They show up to hopefully keep the fire from spreading and put out the flames. They do their best and risk their lives, but time and distance will always their biggest enemy. Story 2820K residents in a valley with no hospital, no minute clinic, nothing. Just a handful of doctors with no regular MDs, weird mix of specialists. Nearest hospital 30 minutes to an hour away. Grocery store has very high prices and is out of stuff a lot. Need hamburger meat. Out. Shiner Bach out. Buying online is a necessity. During a drought, we ran out of water. Neighbors begging others for any water at all. I got the Lions Club to deliver cases of water to those in need. Internet takes all night to download a 1-minute video if you have service at all. When we moved here, I asked the nearest town and all towns in the county if they had a crises management plan. They did not. They do now. Organized at county level. Fire department is all volunteer. Resources for them is hit and miss, but getting better. Service people are not trained professionals, but guys who need work that think they can do whatever job you need done. No Uber or Lyft, just a neighbor who makes runs to the airport now and then. But it is so beautiful here. Deer sleep in my front yard. So quiet. We are not on any flight path. Rarely hear a plane. Peaceful. And live music at almost every brewery or winery. Nice. Story 29. You have to take care of each other. Look, you and your neighbors all know to avoid that one dirt road after it rains, particularly if the road grader hasn't been by in a while. But a few times a year, Someone not from the area will knock on your door, tell you they're stuck, and ask if you can call out a tow truck. That tow truck would get stuck too, so you get your rubber boots, fire up the tractor, and go pull them out. Here's a tip for those of you getting pulled out. We'll likely refuse if you offer us money, but we'd be tickled to get a thank you card in the mail or something you made for us in thanks. With my neighbors, we often said thanks with banana nut bread, a bushel of peaches, pickled okra, etc. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, like it. Be sure to write comments and share your stories.